goody, my upload speed improved from that of a molasses-drenched snail to that of a sloth. Yay! For me personally, when it comes to video games, it's never enough to simply play them. As someone who has casually dabbled with Game Maker since my early childhood, I like to really break video games down and see what makes them tick. As such, the study of the evolution of video game genres has always been an interesting pastime to me. I like to see how ideas were formed and expanded on, how games influenced other games, and other such nerdy topics. And when you're talking about genre-shaping innovations, you'd struggle to top the profound impact that the first Dragon Quest game had on role-playing video games. It's not the very first example of a video game RPG. The genre has its roots in the tabletop RPGs, and Dragon Quest's not the first attempt to transcribe D&D's formula to electronic entertainment. If you want to get really old school, there's the likes of Wizardry and Ultima, two PC games that are commonly cited inspirations for Dragon Quest. However, Dragon Quest was the grand debut of role-playing entertainment on video game consoles, hitting Japan's Famicom in 1986 and North America's NES in 1989. Bringing with it the basic template of the JRPG. Fun fact, the first 4 Dragon Quest games were called Dragon Warrior in the English versions due to some sort of licensing complication, with the title Dragon Quest apparently being owned by TSR at the time. Before I move on, I should probably talk about the version of Dragon Quest I'm playing. I know that there are Switch versions of the first 3 Dragon Quest games, but before those were even announced, I had already bought the mobile remakes, played through the first 2, and am currently in the middle of playing the third one. Really didn't feel like double dipping on this one, and the Switch version is basically just the mobile version on a bigger screen anyway. I'm playing them through the BlueStacks Android emulator on PC, which really isn't a half bad setup once you get used to the narrowed down phone view. Also, this is the only way I could record my own footage, as I don't have any video capturing devices at the moment. Yeah, I know that I can and have used stock footage before, but I like to use my own whenever I can, so I apologize for the aspect ratio and the mouse cursor buzzing around the screen like a pestilent insect. So anyway, all this talk of RPG history is all well and good, but how does the game itself fare? Does this landmark of RPG history stand the test of time and stack up to its modern contemporaries? No, it doesn't, and really, it's pretty unreasonable to expect it to. Complaining about the original Dragon Quest being archaic feels like a pretty redundant argument when I'm talking about a game that's 10 years older than me that came out at a point when RPGs were just beginning to find their footing. Of course it's not gonna have all the bells and whistles of later games in the genre. I personally approached this title as more of an RPG history lesson than a game. I wanted to see where it all started and how the series improved itself as time wore on. And while it's not a game I see myself returning to very often, I felt it was a worthy investment of my time, especially considering that this game isn't very long, lasting only a handful of hours. So, what's it about? Well, it's pretty simple. In the magical kingdom of Alefgard, the vile Dragon Lord has seized power, stealing the ball of light that long protected the kingdom from evil, swarming the land with his army of evil monsters and kidnapping the fair Princess Gwalin. Gwalin? I'm calling her Gwalin. And so, as the resident chosen hero of the hour, you must venture forth to bring peace to the land. Funny thing about Dragon Quest main protagonists, they're all silent heroes, and none of them really have names per se. They're usually just named after the number of the game they're in. Some games sort of give them a default name, and sometimes they're given names in spin-off materials, but even those aren't very consistent. Their name is the one you give them. Alright, now let's talk about the gameplay itself. Let's get the bad out of the way first. The combat's pretty boring, to be honest. Since there's only one playable character, every battle is a mono-y-mono affair against a monster, with very little room for strategy. Everything in the combat basically comes back to pressing the attack button over and over until you need to use a healing spell, with basically every amount of critical thinking dedicated to gauging how much more abuse you're capable of enduring until you flee to the nearest village to recuperate. The game's difficulty is pretty brutal if you couldn't tell, employing the delightful NES design philosophy of, our game's not very long, so let's inflate the length with unreasonable difficulty. If you want to get anywhere, you're gonna have to do a lot of grinding, both to level up and to afford new equipment. Dragon Quest games often present you with more purchasing options than you would reasonably be able to afford when you first come across a new town, and most of the time that's fine, as it makes you think about which equipment you really need and rewards careful spending of the money you earn. However, if the strongest and most expensive equipment is practically required to survive, it turns equipment shopping into a very annoying obstacle to your progress. And it doesn't help that in this game, it takes the townspeople forever to say anything. The game uses an Old English script, and while I'm usually fine with Old English, man, this game can get a little long-winded sometimes. The game's wasting enough of my time as it is, without the king dropping half a Shakespearean script on me every time I want to save the game. That's another problem. There's only one save point. Fortunately, the mobile version sidesteps this by giving you a quick save option that you can use anytime. There are a few other nice tweaks as well compared to the original NES version that made you open a menu to use stairs. Among them being, wow, the remakes actually increased the money and experience points earned in battle? Man, I am never playing the original Dragon Warrior. Alright, that's enough griping, onto some good stuff. I like how open-ended the world is. It's not very large, but the only place that's technically blocked off is the Dragon Lord's castle, which you can actually see once you exit the town you start in. You can see your goal, it's just a matter of how you gain entry, and it's entirely up to you to explore and piece together how to accomplish your goal, with your only real help being advice you get from townspeople. I'll admit that I resorted to a guide at certain points, but for the most part, you won't have much trouble finding out what you need to know if you keep your eyes peeled. I know I've complained at great length about the game's difficulty, but I do really appreciate that the game clearly warns you when you're heading into more dangerous territory with these bridges. It's a nice touch. The music is also excellent, if a little simple. Koichi Sugiyama's Dragon Quest compositions got off to a pretty strong start with the first game, with the overworld theme in particular really sticking in my head. Also, here's a surprise. The mobile version has, in my opinion, the best version of the in-game soundtrack. The 8 and 16-bit versions of the soundtrack are both great in their own way, but the best version will always be the orchestral recording. And while the mobile version is MIDI from what I can tell, it's still the version that seems the closest to the orchestral score. And then there's the enemy designs. Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball fame designs both the characters and enemies in Dragon Quest, but the enemy sprites are the more detailed of the two in this game, so his style shines through the best with them. I might not have enjoyed the combat that much, but at least the enemies I fought looked interesting, with even stuff like skeletons getting a bit of charm to them. Seriously, how am I supposed to believe that I'm a hero making a stand against the forces of evil when half of the monsters just make me want to hug them? Regarding the plot, there admittedly isn't much to go on. The goal is laid out at the start, and nothing really happens or changes as things progress, but there were some notable highlights. The Dragon Lord's a pretty nothing threat for most of the game. Lots of people talk about him, and he's the reason you're fighting all these monsters, but his presence isn't really felt until the end of the game. That being said, there was this town. The game teaches you that towns are safe zones, so when you enter this one and find that it's been completely leveled by the Dragon Lord, it serves as a sudden reminder that he means business. Speaking of the Dragon Lord, before you fight him, he actually offers you half the kingdom in exchange for your allegiance, and you can take him up on it. And while the result of joining him is pretty underwhelming, it's neat that the choice is there. For a more substantial choice, there's Princess Gwalin. You don't rescue her from the Dragon Lord at the end of the game like you'd expect. You actually find her imprisoned in a cave during the adventure. It's ostensibly a very by-the-books medieval princess rescue where you slay the dragon guarding her, she swoons a whole bunch, and you carry her off to the castle in style, but it's made a lot more interesting by the simple fact that it's completely optional. Yeah. There are a number of things you need to do to gain access to the Dragon Lord's castle, but rescuing the princess is surprisingly not one of them. You can just ignore her completely and leave her in captivity for all eternity, you monster. Clearly, saving her is the canonical ending since Dragon Quest II mentions it happening, but you don't really have to do it. Sadly, there's not a whole lot else I can say on the game's positive end, though I will say that beating it was pretty satisfying in the end. Mandatory level grinding isn't an attractive feature in any game, but there is a certain visceral enjoyment to be gained from clawing your way up through the ranks of monsters, growing more powerful bit by bit, and finally toppling the big bad himself. Interestingly, the credits don't roll immediately after you beat the Dragon Lord. They only roll after you return to the main castle. But until you do that, you're allowed to roam an enemy-free world with everyone applauding your heroic feats. So that's where Earthbound got the idea. Once you return, the king offers you his throne, but the hero suddenly stops being a silent protagonist and decides to travel abroad and found his own kingdom. Gwalin joins him on his new journey, assuming it did your job as hero, and the game ends. Like I said, I approach the first Dragon Quest as more of an RPG history lesson than a game. If this game sounded like every RPG you've ever played, it's because every RPG you've ever played owes this one big time. It may seem bare bones and formulaic today, but that's because it basically created the RPG formula. It's kind of surreal to think that there was a time in gaming history where experience points, leveling up, buying equipment, and exploring an overworld wasn't the status quo. A status quo that this game solidified. If you don't care about all this RPG history lesson stuff and just want a good game to play, I'd say that there isn't really anything here that future games didn't do better. But it did do one very important thing. Do you see this fine fellow? His name is Erdrick, and I hope you like that name because boy, it's coming up a lot in this script. He's the central figure of Dragon Quest I's mythos. If people in this game aren't busy talking about how the Dragon Lord has ruined their day, they'll be talking about the legendary hero of the past, Erdrick, and how he descended from the heavens to the world below, and was apparently just the greatest warrior the world had seen. #1 hero, evil destroyer extraordinaire. That darkness-vanquishing ball of light that the Dragon Lord stole? Erdrick put it there. You can find Erdrick's sword and armor, and they're the best in the game by a distance. Why are you the chosen one destined to save the land? Because you're the descendant of Erdrick, that's why. And his influence doesn't stop at this game either. The first 3 Dragon Quest games form a connected trilogy with Erdrick's name on it, and I might as well say now that the third one is pretty good. That's a big reason why I bothered to play the first 2 games in the series at all, actually. I heard that playing them enhances the third game quite a bit, and I wanted to experience the complete package. The first game might not have aged particularly well, but as we will soon see, Dragon Quest wasted no time in improving itself. Join me next time when I talk about Dragon Quest II: Luminaries of the Legendary Line. Later, everyone!